Hello, hello. So before I start, I just wanna say, so this presentation is gonna be about reclaiming the cypherpunk dream. I'm gonna discuss like what was the dream, what the internet looks like today, and hopefully how do we fix it. I will do an introduction about myself a bit later, but just for now, I'm just gonna say I'm the CEO of Calimero Network and get into it. So I'm gonna start like what was the internet not supposed to be, right? So like 23andMe selling customer genetic data, Amazon being fined for data protection problems, Facebook spying on competitors, ByteDance, handling miners' data. Currently, we have GDPR, right? So like we have at least some fines for companies when they do wrong. Sometimes they want to do it, maybe, and sometimes they're like just, you know, making a mistake. So like what was the internet supposed to be? So like if you say Julian Assange, his quote, so the internet, our greatest tool of emancipation, has been transformed into the most dangerous facilitator of totalitarianism we have seen. Like a very powerful quote. So like if you think about it, every time when you use the internet today, you talk to a centralized service provider, you're giving a little piece of data which gets stored about you. And they essentially know more than you do know about yourself. And so like I'm gonna start about my journey into like Web 2 and Web 3. So essentially I started my career at big tech. I worked there. I saw in 2017 this ICO boom is coming, so I joined the Layer 1 project. Spent some time there, worked as like a protocol developer, so worked on consensus. Realized that like there's a lot of cool technology there, but not really use cases. So I went back to big tech again. I spent 2 more years there, and this sign was like in front of the office. I was smoking there every day and thinking about like, okay, this sign is telling me. So essentially, the sign was your right to privacy has been revoked. And me working in a big tech company, I was like thinking, maybe I should go back to Web3. So essentially, in 2022, I joined as like the first infrastructure engineer at Near Protocol, another layer one. Worked on various things, and then essentially transitioned into what I call the open web. And the open web, like for me, what Web 2 is was like centralized service providers providing you a service for, like either selling your data through ads or charging you for money, but you have zero control. And then Web 3 came and said like, okay, we're gonna be decentralized now. But the only focus of Web 3 mostly was about money. So if you think about, blockchain as a technology, it's not really good for every single use case, which we would love to see of the internet. And then open web is kind of like this thing which encompasses this statement, in my opinion. A trusted third party is one too many. So essentially, if you read any cypherpunk articles, titles, books, David Cham, one of the pioneers of cyberpunk, tells you that you should not trust anybody. Like, why would you have to trust anybody with your data, with your money, with your private keys, with anything you do on the internet? And if you look historically, the internet started decentralized, right? We had DARPANET, we had packet switching, we had SMTP. SMTP is like the first usable decentralized protocol, but we don't use it in a decentralized way. Then, we had CryptoArk under his manifest of World Wide Web. Also, in the idea of the World Wide Web was to be decentralized, right? Then we had PGP to have privacy on the internet, HTTP, which is a decentralized protocol again. And then we get to 1994, first browser, and then something happens. And like I like to call it like there's like three streams of the internet. One stream was centralized service providers. So like Amazon was born, eBay was born, Hotmail, Google, all of these companies. On the other side, we had first digital cash. So many of predecessors of Bitcoin. And then we had also peer-to-peer applications like Napster. So like peer-to-peer music sharing. And what I call open web is essentially Napster and the money. So like how do we use normal applications plus the financials part. And then we had the dot-com bubble. Obviously, a lot of money was invested into centralized companies, and there's a really good reason why. So like, why did we go from being peer-to-peer and decentralized into becoming centralized? And the reason is very simple. It's just cheaper and it's more convenient for the end user. So the end user like didn't really care about his data at that point of time. It was not even a discussion. It was like, I want to connect to the internet. I want to use the easiest, best solution out there. And all the, even today, all the peer-to-peer solutions we have are like pretty crappy. And then we had, Google, Gmail, a lot of money went into investments of a centralized service provider. Today, I actually looked up like how much money, like what is the percent, we say a lot of money went into Web3, so I looked up like what's the percentage of Web3 companies versus, standard software as a service and centralized companies, like 1 or 2%. So like 50 times more or 60 times more went into like the standard Web2 investment. So, and that was much, much earlier as well. So like inflation and everything. And then 2008, we have Bitcoin, which starts, right? The financial revolution, later on Ethereum. But there's like two protocols or like ideas which are not really talked about often. One of them was Urbit, and the other is UGAM protocol. Essentially what they tried to do was, and we have ActivityPub protocol and Mastodon. So essentially there was this first, again, protocols which are trying to build peer-to-peer applications in the world. And there's this conference today. I really like that we are here because cypherpunks used to be like one group of people. Web3 people used to be, degens and another, group of people. And today we see that we have like one thing in common. We have like self-sovereignty, right? Doesn't matter if you work in Web2 or you're like true hardcore privacy guy or you're like a Web3 degen. Everybody will agree that privacy is important. So why does the open web suck today? That's a question. So like we have many people here who are building, Web3 or open web protocols, but like why are we not getting adoption? And I mean, first, developer experience is pretty bad. If you try to build anything on any open source privacy protocol today, it's quite hard and quite bad, in my opinion. And the other thing is like user experience for the end user is terrible as well. So like the only application, in my opinion, today, which is like true privacy application, which is used by the masses, is Signal. We can discuss about this or that, but in general, like Signal is the only application which truly has good enough user experience which masses use. So the question is like, how are we actually doing so bad then if we like compared like open web or Web3 as an industry? I would say not, because first we wanted decentralization. We got, we can, discuss how decentralized some protocols are, but we are getting there. Transparency, we solved. Censorship resistance, pretty good. Permissionless, as well, pretty good. Programmability, composability, I think also like quite decent. But the things which we are missing is like user sovereignty. So we always said users will own their data. We don't. We don't even own, like we own our private and private key and our identity on transparent blockchain protocols where everybody can see which transactions you made. So like you're not even anonymous. Like if you trust your bank, at least your bank can see your data and sell it. But if you use like some of the privacy, like if you use some of the open protocols, everybody can see it, right? And then the other thing is like privacy. I mean, privacy is generally pretty bad. And I said user experience, developer experience. And one thing, like, how do we solve it, right? One of these theses of cypherpunks was that cypherpunks write code. So, like, we need to build the systems which are better. But to build the better systems, we need a very nice developer experience. And I'm going to talk about, like, how we as a company and what do we do are trying to achieve this. So if you're interested in, like, what we do at Calimero, you can check out our core repository, our other repositories, and our docs. And one thing I just also wanted is like this: if you just read any of the cypherpunk manifests or like any cypherpunk texts, I mean, they're awesome. So for privacy to be widespread, it must to be part of a social contract. People must come together to deploy these systems for the common good. Privacy only extends so far as the cooperation of one fellows in society. And people always say, like, it's a like standard thing at this conference. Like, people say, "Oh, do you believe in privacy? Do you trust? Do you want to have privacy?" Yes, I want to have privacy, but what are you doing about privacy? I'm doing nothing about privacy. And I mean, essentially, we are like on the same spot. So I want to say, like, what is Calimero? Like, what we learned, like, what I learned personally from working at like big tech, then working in Web3 on like various blockchain protocols, is that to really get user ownership, users who should have the ability to host their apps and data. So like having local first applications. Local piece first doesn't mean that every single, data point has to be stored on your device, but it could be stored like in a T. In the future, maybe we could use FAG. But ideally, you would have to have your data by yourself somehow. Then the other thing, it should be simple. So like we should be able to build privacy applications without thinking about complex stuff. Like you should not be an encryption expert. You should not be, we use, for example, CRDTs expert, a database expert. You should be able just to write a simple microservice, which is peer-to-peer by default. There should be no central authority. So just no servers, just peers. So like BitTorrent with compute. It should be encrypted. So every time when you interact with some peers, the data is encrypted, nobody can see it. Peer-to-peer, obviously, and it has to be open source. Like if any project claims that they are privacy preserving and not open source, it's like an oxymoron. Like it cannot be. It has to be open source. People have to validate what's inside. You have to see, is it doing actually what it's supposed to do? And then first protocol, SMTP. What happened? You have a server, you host your server, somebody else hosts a server, you send an email directly peer-to-peer. And then hosting servers is hard. So hosting servers is expensive, especially like, 20 years ago. So what we did was like, let's say any company provides the SMTP server for me, they host it, but I give my privacy away. In an ideal world like today, the internet is fast, storage is cheap, compute is cheap. There's like nothing preventing us of actually running our own services except the user experience. And like what Calimero is essentially is this. How do I go back? It's a general purpose framework which allows you to build a simple microservice in Rust or JavaScript. You deploy it on the Calimero node, and you have application context. An application context is a peer-to-peer network where the data is replicated between the members. And how does it work? So we use WASM. WASM is the application runtime. We have our own runtime which we build on top of WASM. You will write your application. You can say like this, this data point is shared, this data point is private, this data point is immutable, and then this gets broadcast to your peers. So you have sync and execution. For sync and execution, it has to be real time, right? Like blockchains are slow because you have to have block times, you have to wait. Even with some fast blockchains, like 500 milliseconds, it's too slow, right? And especially if you're like replicating data a lot. So what we use CRDTs and DAGs. CRDT is a conflict-free replicated data type, which allows you to merge state locally in any order. So essentially, you have determinism once you receive the payload, and you apply, you deterministically apply like everybody else. And the DAG is essentially just a directed acyclic graph, which allows us to, like GitHub, track the changes, how the changes were made. So essentially, if I made a change, I'm gonna make the change on top of my root hash and then broadcast it to the network. If somebody else does a change on top of their, they're gonna broadcast it, and then we're gonna have some conflict resolution to essentially converge to the same state. And then we have, standard libp2p and APIs. You have an RPC client, so you can use like Python to talk to the node. You can use JavaScript to talk to the node. You can use Rust to talk to the node, and build any application, mobile, front end, whatever. So yeah, we use like gossip sub broadcasts. So essentially, every contest, application context is a libp2p gossip sub, which is encrypted, and only the members of the specific gossip sub can decrypt the messages. So you have a key sharing exchange between all the members. You encrypt with your sender key, and all the other nodes have public key which they can decrypt the messages with, public sender key to decrypt the payload. And pretty much like how it works, there's like two types of operandi. If you are executing a transaction locally, you run it through the runtime, you produce a CRD you broadcast it to everybody else, and then everybody else who receives it, they can just dump it to the storage based on that. And then you have periodic P2P syncs in case you were offline. So you could even use the CRDT value offline, edit a document, work on the board. And once you get online, you will broadcast it to everybody else, and everybody else will converge to the same state. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. I mean, if you want to learn more about what we are doing and how we get to, normal applications to be, again, peer-to-peer and fast, talk to me. Thank you.